When you start, Phil.
Okay.
Good morning. We'll be starting up here in about, a minute or so, just letting everybody log in. We know it's 9 o'clock, but we'll give you a little time to finish logging in. Okay, slow down a little bit, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name's David Orr. I'm the director here with the Corner Local Roads program with the New York State LTAP Center, and welcome to one of our foundational webinars on what is a cold week statewide. Not expected to see above freezing anywhere in the state, even down in the southern part of the state along the island. Today we're going to be talking about worker safety so that everybody gets home every single day. That's our primary goal, whether you're out dealing with snow and ice or you're inside working on equipment. Our instructor today is going to be Phil Spiezio, who is with Washington County. How long you been with Washington County, Phil?
About 18 years, David.
About 18 years.
Yep.
Time flies when you're having fun, isn't it? We were
Yes,
talking
for
about
sure.
that just a minute ago. So,
Work equals fun.
so again, Phil is going to give you some advice on how to stay safe, whatever activities you do, both a little bit at work and actually you can take those things working at home too. So, Phil, I'll let you get started and I'll go dark.
Super. Thanks, David. All right, so we'll get into this. Today we're talking a little bit about worker safety, a little bit of a twist on the topics, in a train to trainer type role. But as David said, our number one goal is to go home every day, maybe in a little bit better condition that we even started work. And that's what our overall goal is. So let's get into this and see where it takes us.
All
Yes,
right,
yes.
Phil. So I'm going to
Thanks,
start with I
Jody.
work for. I'll let everybody answer. Give it a few more seconds. Seems like it's across the board. We have town, county, couple, state, private, and none for the weekend.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All right, now let's go to my job is.
Jody, maybe that none for the weekend is because of how busy the weekends were as far as shoveling
Right?
the snow and ice and everything.
I agree. All right, so we have some engineers, highway supers, admin, a couple field crew, board members, and one for none of the above. If you're none of the above, if you want to put that into the Q&A, let us know what that is. And then the last one is going to be years in current position. Wow, we have a lot for 11 to 20.
Okay, that's
We have less than a month as well, and it's all
okay.
across the
Good.
board for the rest. All right. Phil, I'm gonna go quiet and I will let you finish up.
Great. Thanks for jumping in, Jody. All right, so let's start with the how of safety. And over the years, David mentioned or asked about how long I'd been with the county, and then I was private sector, somewheres in the neighborhood of 5, 6 years, directly involved in safety, and then another 10 or so indirectly involved in safety, also operating and managing a concrete manufacturing plant for a precast facility. So I spent about 15 years there and put myself through college electrical engineering, working for a local paper mill and some other odd jobs to keep things going. But when I start thinking about safety and I was like, how do we make an impact on safety? Lots of times we're thinking it's not going to happen to me when we take that risk, an act and we do something in which we take more risk than what the task deserves, and how do we get people to think about that a little bit? So this how of safety of making it a personal connection with people, I think that really puts in perspective that, hey, if you're not going to do it for yourself or maybe for the team, think about the people and the people that you connect with and do things on a personal basis. And it's not only the serious injuries, but there's also the injuries that occur that do take it and make it more difficult to do these things with the people that are really, really important to you. So making it a personal connection, I think, is really important, regardless of whether you're directly involved in safety or you're leading people or you're working with people. Remind them that, hey, there's other things that are trying to push you to where you want to be, safety wise and minimizing that risk. The why of safety is about your family and friends, your coworkers, your organization for sure, the overall community, and of course you. The little sticker on my hard helmet from years ago that I think states a lot is that we have to be able to help each other and make sure that we're not always mind on task everybody, but if we're all watching out for each other and able to communicate and say, hey, wait a minute, think about what you're doing here, put your safety glasses on, or wear your hard helmet, or take that vest and get yourself a new vest because it's dirty, that sort of thing. So asking me to overlook a simple safety violation will be asking me to compromise my entire attitude toward the value of your life, right? So allow other people to correct, and be one of those people that say, hey, wait a minute, go get the right ladder. That's not the appropriate ladder to use for the job you're doing, or go get a ladder instead of using a chair or something like that. So that I think that slide means a lot from the very core of safety. So that leads us to the core of safety and what that is. And uh, many people may have heard me say this before, but really viewing safety as a core value of both yourself and your team really goes a long way in establishing all of the variables, if you would, the elements of a safety program. And I say this as opposed to safety being just a priority, because priorities change. Priorities are easily influenced by outside circumstances. Priorities change all the time. It doesn't mean things are less important. It just means it's a higher priority at that point, where if you view safety as a value, it's how you grew up or it's what you're made of. And outside influences don't change that as easily as what priorities are changed. So I really like to view safety as more of a core value than just a priority. So there's a couple distinct things when you start looking at, all right, what's the what is safety? What is safety and what it's all about? And I remember many of you may know about the SHARP program. New York State Department of Labor has done. It's similar to the VPP program that's done at the OSHA level. But that way back in the day when I first started safety, I realized that, people in people in management roles and maybe even owners of companies, they don't really understand what a safety program is or what's involved, or how do you change a culture so that you get a culture of safety as a value. And there's two distinct parts in my opinion. One's the hazards and the hazard controls. That's what you do and how you control the hazards. And then the second part, which is maybe even the more important part, is the human element. Is, all right, how do we get people to understand the hazards and actually do the hazard control measures to minimize the risk? We can't eliminate all risk, but we can certainly minimize risk. Is task specific pretty easily when we start, looking at it and breaking it down. So, all right, so here's a slide. I'll spend a couple of minutes on this one, but goal is simply to be the best, right? I firmly believe people come to work and they come to work saying, hey, how can we make tomorrow better than today? They're not coming to work and saying, ah, wonder what I can screw up today type thing. It's an attitude of, all right, how do we make our team better, right? It's all about us. It's not about me type thing. So thinking about this, and it came up with this little bit of a slide here. Goal is to simply be the best. We all want to be as good as we possibly can be. If we're going to do something, it's worth doing it well. and striving to be the best at it. So I break it down. B stands for the basics, right? What it is that we're trying to do. And the basics is really, you can boil this down to whatever you do. It's what's your systems, which is a procedure, it's a policy, it's a program, it's an engineering thing. It's whatever the systems is that we've developed, we refined, and we've tested, we've vetted it. And then training people to follow those systems or to use those systems that we actually put together. And then maybe the most important thing is the culture is the training effective and efficient? And is it consistent with the systems we developed? And then from a culture standpoint is that what we're really doing? Or do we train the new person on it? And then we have a senior person maybe in the background saying, nah, that's what we say we do, or that's what we train people to do, that's what we tell people to do, but nah, not really. That's not really how we do it. And I think if you break it down and talk about the basics, it's either a system, it's a training, or it's a culture. And then efficiency, we strive to be efficient. None of us, I think, are doing less with more people these days. We're all doing more with less people. And that has a whole set of variables in itself, safety related when you start doing things like that. But in order to be efficient, you've got to be safe, right? You don't want to get anybody hurt to the point where they can't do the same thing they could do before they got hurt. So you ask yourself the question, am I going to hurt myself or someone else? So that's the safety side of it. Quality is, we're doing more with less. We can't afford to do it wrong the first time. So you want to be working on things that are right the first time from the quality standpoint. And then we have to find ways to be productive because we continually do more with less people. So that's the efficiency part of it. And then from a safety standpoint, we've all talked about this over the years, is what do you do? What's the task at hand? What's the job? All right. So with the tasks to do that particular job, what are the hazards associated with those tasks? And then finally, what are our control measures? So what control measures do we put in place? Engineering controls, maybe even elimination, safe work practices, training, and PPE are those control measures for those hazards. And then perhaps the most important is the team and the makeup of the team, which rounds out the T in best. And I think the fundamental foundational building blocks of developing any sort of team, regardless of what you do, is trust, certainly probably the most important, the leadership, and then communication. And if you have those three elements as your foundation for developing a team, everything else becomes much easier. If you don't have that, then the elements of the team become much more difficult. So we all know it takes a little bit of time to earn somebody's trust, but it takes a very, very short period of time to lose somebody's trust. And then when you lose that trust, it's very difficult if not impossible, to earn it back. And one of the things I love about my job is I get to work with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things each day. And within 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour, if I haven't worked with that group before, I work with a team, maybe a certain building or a certain department. And usually you can tell within 15, 20 minutes, perhaps a half an hour of what the feeling of trust is within that group. And by far and away, the teams I work with, I have the opportunity to do things with, in which there's a fundamental building block of trust present between people. They their performance is so much better than those organizations or teams that lack some trust in within or between some of the people in their team. So a little bit of a slide on how to be your best, both individually and as a team. Systems training and culture make up something, I referred to as the grassroots part of safety. And that was the B, the basics, and the best. Develop systems, sound systems, effective systems, refine the systems as you start to look at them to make sure they're actually doing what you want them to do. Train people to do what it is your systems are explaining or stating that we do. So train people to be effective and efficient to that. And then don't forget the culture side of things, building that culture and making sure that, hey, we want to do this. We are part of building that system where the training is important. We agree with the training, and then that culture follows suit so that you can actually do what you say you're going to do, kind of like an ISO process there. Sorry about that, just turned the radio off a little bit. So that's a little bit about the grassroots safety systems training and culture. So the systems, engineering, controls, procedure, guidelines, hazard assessment, analysis, and controls. Everybody's pretty familiar with the hierarchy in the systems. The training is effective and efficient and measurable, right? That's important when it comes to the training. Is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it measurable? Are we actually doing what we say we're doing and teaching people how to do it and do it right? And then the culture, the biggest side of it is what's our culture like? The culture, the attitude, or the collective um, attitude of the team members built on some sort of influence by type thing, right? Leadership through influence is something to think about. Trust, leadership, and communication, you can see that there. That's the fundamental building blocks of any team type thing. Hierarchy of hazard control. This is review probably for everybody on here. The backslashes between the top two control measures and the bottom three are dividing it out because the top two, we separate the hazard from us, right? That's the guard on the box fan or the PTO shaft. It's the plexiglass in between you and the cashier, when COVID was around, things of that nature. The engineering controls, you're separating out the fob systems, in the buildings that we're putting up now, the DPW garages and things, you got fobs instead of keys and things, type of engineering control. When you get to the bottom three, those things, they rely on us, right? And how many of us know that we write a procedure, we're going to use a ladder, a step ladder, the appropriate size step ladder to change a light bulb, right, in our house or at work or wherever it might be. And then ask ourselves the same question, how many of us have used a chair or something else? Or a pet peeve of mine is as some of you know, is the 5-gallon upside down bucket. But we all agree that if we're writing a procedure, we're going to put in there the ladder. But oftentimes we find ourselves taking a shortcut. We got away with it before, whatever the reason, and we end up not following it. So those bottom three, when it starts to rely on us, we have to be careful about that. So always try to work above as best you can. And an example would be you're cutting concrete. We're going to put a wet saw in there, right? Cut down in the dust, cut down in the flying debris. That doesn't mean you don't have to wear safety glasses or goggles or shields or respirators or anything like that, but it does minimize the risk, and then the PPE takes care of the rest. So think a little bit about that when the hierarchy of hazard controls, and you found a hazard, now we got to do something about it. Safety standards, construction 1926, DPW in the shop. So at your location, your general industries apply, which is the 1910. Some of you out there may do MSHA with mine safety and health, and that's another standard as well. So the enforcement side, so private sector safety and health laws are enforced by OSHA. In the public sector, New York State, they're pretty much the same regulations. There's a few different changes, right to know, and some others, workplace violence, sexual harassment, type stuff there. But from the public sector standpoint, PASH, Public Employee Safety and Health, enforces the OSHA regulations on the public sector employees of New York State. So DPW, Department of Public Works, is the public side of things in New York State. And that's where, PESH comes into play from an enforcement standpoint. So let's go over some topics here in developing our program, or reviewing, or maybe refining, revising, that sort of thing. Incident reporting, it's really important to make sure that your team, your employees, all of your department members are trained in what to do should they have to report an incident. And the 911 is the dial, is the call to make. Make sure you know where you are and then do your best to explain what type of emergency it is. In 911, generally you're calling for, serious injury, some sort of fire, an odor of gas, smell of smoke or visible smoke, hazardous conditions such as maybe a chemical spill or electrical power lines down, crash resulting in some sort of property damage, is typically a 911 call, and your safety is a concern, meaning that you feel that your safety is in jeopardy. Those things, all require pretty much a 911 call. The property damage would be probably something, on the road offside your property. Probably not a 911 call if you're backing a piece of equipment in and you hit the mirror and the threshold of the door or something like that. But if it's involving property damage that you don't own, your department doesn't own, strongly encourage you to call the 911 number when you're doing that. So having a sound system to report the non-911 incidences are really important too, to gather information and basically do everything you can to prevent, something like that or similar to what just happened from occurring again. The injury and illness logs. Okay, so this is good timing of the year for this. This 900.1 that you see, there's an example here up on the screen, but these have to be posted by February 1st, and they're posted until April 30th, in which you can take down and then put in a file. I always recommend, 3 to 5 years, hold this stuff or put it electronically in a file, scan it in, that sort of thing. But this is the 900.1. Private sector, it would be a 300A. And it's really a summary of your previous year's injuries and illnesses with the number of hours worked. So the 900 logs and the 300 logs you'll see there, the 900 logs is just that. It's a log. It's current within 7 calendar days, and it's the 300 for the private sector folks. And they're logged where you keep them in a file. And it's the injury. There's a bit more information with that, and that stays in the file. That does not get posted. So by February 1st, 901 if you're public sector, 300A if your private sector, should be posted and kept posted till April 30th. Backing safety, operator backing safety. This is something when you start looking at a couple things that jump out at you when you start doing statistics from an injury, illness, incident standpoint, and slip, trips, and falls always show up. But from an operator standpoint, backing is probably one of the most, if not the most dangerous thing we do. So avoid backing whenever possible. Use a spotter. If the spotter doesn't see the operator doesn't see the spotter, then they need to stop. And remember, goal, get out and look. So, when you don't, it's impossible to have a spotter. Make sure you get out, look. Don't forget to look up as well as around where you're going to be backing up. Really careful about that. HAZCOM right to know, most everybody knows this. This is the oldest standard, but it's also one of the most cited ones still. So an inventory of all your chemicals, SDSs, they used to be the MSDSs, if you recall, standard data safety sheets or safety data sheets for each chemical. So they were standardized. They're a little bit, the MSDSs used to be all over the place. You used to have to search for information, and oftentimes they're long documents. And now these SDSs are 16 sections. Each section is the same for every single chemical, and it's globally, meaning that anywhere you go in the world, you're going to find this safety data sheet. There's labeling, there's the secondary containers. Make sure if you're putting something in a secondary container that it's actually suitable to hold what you're putting it in. And then the training around the HAZCOM right to know. So don't allow chemicals in the workplace without an SDS on file. So in other words, if a vendor comes by and says, hey, I got this new chemical, try it, here you go. Well, make sure that you have an SDS for each chemical that you have. Hazard assessment. So we'll spend a second on this because this is something we all have to do, and you have to have a hazard assessment and has to be done or revised at least annually. So it really boils down to what tasks are you asking people to do, and then what are the hazards associated with that task. All of the control measures. Now, there's a PPE hazard assessment that talks specifically about PPE. But I'm a big fan of if you're looking at a certain task, make sure you put in all the control measures, what to do, that sort of thing. So, and what control measures are required to keep you safe. So this hazard assessment has to be done at least annually. You start a new job, start a new hazard assessment for that job or that task, and involve the people doing the task. Much more successful when you start working with the people actually doing it. If they're part of building this hazard assessment piece, and they are much more apt to follow it. So real important from a standpoint. If you got like a little safety steering team or something such as that, safety committee, this is really good work for that safety committee level people to try to make a difference, excuse me, day to day in the environment. Hazardous energy control, so lockout, tagout, often known as when you're doing a hazardous energy control, the loader comes to mind with the hydraulics and things like that. Make sure that whoever is doing maintenance on loaders or something in which that requires the loader to be locked out and tagged out, control of hazardous energy. Make sure we notify the employees that we're doing that, and make sure you identify people who are doing the lockout tagout or authorized to do so. Make sure they understand all the energy sources and the effective lockout for a loader or a dump truck or anything like that, including the dump body. If it's up, it should be blocked and protected against coming down. All the energy sources have been neutralized. Special attention for the lighting, the LED lighting and things, that they will hold power. So be sure that you ground those out properly, get them to a neutral state. Remove any guards after this and begin. So make sure you've done everything. And then basically reverse steps when equipment goes back into service. A quick note, if you're doing lockout, tag out, and it's like on a motor, maybe a conveyor belt type thing where there'd be a three-phase motor or something, or anything, make sure that you put it into neutral or the off position. So after you've locked it out, you have all the energy sources. Before you start taking guards off and everything, you attempt to start the piece of equipment. It doesn't start, so make sure you push the stop or put it back in the neutral position, because you don't want to throw the breaker, the disconnect switch, throw it back on and have it just start up the equipment right away. You want to make sure that you control the normal startup operation. So be careful about that if any of you out there are working with something such as that. And then the annual certifications. So you have a dump truck, you have a loader, you might have an air compressor, some other things that require a lockout tagout. On an annual basis, there's a certification form that an authorized employee can fill out while another authorized employee test the lockout tagout system or procedure you've developed, and also test that the person is proficient in what they're doing. And so this annual certification, oftentimes I find that it's missed, but it's important. You don't have to do it on every single dump truck, but you have to do it on a dump truck. You have to do it on a loader. You have to do it if you have an air compressor or any other things that require lockout tagout that you might be working on. And what it does, it tests both the system and it tests both the training to make sure that people follow, understand, and follow the system. So that's a bit about hazardous control. We do that, we don't do an awful lot in public works, but we do some of it. And certainly our maintenance people and working on some of our equipment, mowers and loaders and dump trucks and plows and things like that. Really important to not forget about that lockout, tagout, hazardous energy control. So in confined space, identifying all the confined spaces is important. Even if you're not going in them, you got to make sure that they're signed appropriately, and say, hey, confined space, stay out, we don't enter. If you are doing some permitted or confined space or permitted, make sure you have a good system to follow. Some of our water and sewer district type employees, right, will be going down and possibly going and entering confined spaces and things. Or if we're going down into, some sort of containment system. Confined spaces basically makes up of two things. It's not designed for continuous human occupancy, and it has difficult means of access in or egress out of these spaces is a confined space. And permitted confined space, from a simplistic approach is any other hazard. Any other hazard associated with that space would make it a permitted confined space because you got to control that hazard. So develop systems to enter if you do enter, and if not, sign them appropriately. And if we are entering spaces or whatever we're doing with confined space, make sure we're training people to that level. It's real important. Every year you hear about maybe not the person that went into confined space, but certainly the rescuers and losing their lives because of going into confined space and maybe not understanding the hazards associated with it. So be careful, special attention to the confined spaces. We have just enough of them around to be a bit dangerous. So let's talk about trenching. Probably everybody on the call today does some sort of trenching work, excavation work, and things like that. So we'll spend a couple minutes on this. But probably the number one thing I would ask people to walk away with is never ever enter an unprotected trench. There's lots of hidden dangers when it comes to trenching and things like that, not only from collapse but other hazards as well. So if you're going in a trench, make sure it's properly protected. We'll talk about that. So the picture of an excavation trenching job that we're doing is a pretty good job. You can see the water there. You can see the soil type, right? It's not holding itself up by any means there. So you cave in the water, things, there's some hazards associated with this. This is a picture of the foreman. If you look closely, the foreman there in the orange hat, he wasn't real happy to see me that day, and he managed to force a smile for the picture, which I liked and stuff. But I showed up at maybe not such a great time for him. But we worked through everything, and it ended up being on a good day, at least from my standpoint. But we don't want somebody injured or hurt, right? None of us get paid enough, compensated enough to get injured on the job. We want to go home, if not the same shape, better than what we came to work. And that's the most important thing here. This was a pretty difficult job, and there's something that the foreman didn't do all that often. So we worked through some stuff. Type of soil is important, right? A, B, C, and solid rock come to mind when we're working with different types of soil. Yeah, we also have, the definition, right? Trenches 4 feet or deeper require a safe means of access, egress every 25 feet. 5 feet or deeper, they're going to require some sort of protected system. I'm here, let's not get the tape measure out. We're 3.5, 4 feet in the ground. We better, make sure that we contain the soil, we prevent any sort of collapse of the material, caving in of sorts in the trenching. They're sloping, they're shoring, and they're shielding. A lot of us are sloping. Some of us use trench boxes and things like that. Some of the villages and towns are more so apt to use that on water mains and things of that nature. If you go into a trench that's 20 feet or deeper, it does require a PE designed system for that. Always keep your spoils, equipment, anything at least 2 feet away from the trench edge. And then, OSHA spells out a competent person inspect the trench daily, especially when you're having different type of weather events and things like that. It's always a good idea to make sure you're doing the trenching. So one of the things to think about here is the type of soil, right? Type A is relatively stable. We're never really digging type A soils because in the definition, if it's been already dug out, so it's already been disturbed, it automatically goes to a type B soil. And then type C soil is oftentimes what we're digging in. So type B is 1-to-1 when it comes to the sloping. So for 1 foot down, you're going 1 foot out. Type A would be like a 3/4 to 1, and then the type C soil, you're looking at 1.5 to 1. So you can have a pretty big hole pretty quickly when you're dealing with type C soil, but it's very important to protect your people from cave-ins and things like that. And if you don't have to go in the trench, right? Think about not putting somebody in there, that elimination start, right? That portion of that hierarchy of hazard control. Don't forget that elimination things. We don't have to go in it, don't go in it. So work zone and flagging things, just a brief review from a work zone flagger. Make sure you have a system every time, document the system, consider photos, big fan of that, so that you have some documentation on what it is you did that day. There's a good app out there that you can document those in what vehicles you had there, people, things like that. Test the system. Once you set it up, whatever your system is, with your signs and your flags and your equipment, or test to see what the driver is seeing when they drive through the work zone. So test the system out, drive through it yourself. Remember signage first, flaggers next, and then finally bringing in the equipment. Try not to get the equipment there before you get your work zone set up, because now you're creating hazards with that equipment on the side of the road, things like that. So try to time it so you get your signs out, get your flaggers in place, and then put your equipment out there. And the same type of thing when we're finishing up work for the day or for that particular project, right? Let's get the equipment out of the way. Let's get the flaggers out of the way, and then let's get those signs picked up. When you're picking up signs, don't forget to protect yourself from oncoming traffic, with picking up those signage and things. Don't try to get yourself caught between oncoming traffic and putting the signs in the trucks and things. Think about protecting yourself when it comes to that. There's a lot more to that. I certainly would view every vehicle that's on the road or approaching a work zone as if it wants to run you over, because there's many people distracted for many different reasons out there. So you really have to be sure that you're being seen, you have a way out, and make sure you never turn your back on traffic. View every vehicle as if it wants to run you over. So
So,
work centers. Well, go ahead.
a question.
Yeah.
What are the names of the apps that keep track of the work zone areas?
So I think we have one. I mean, I don't know where my phone is now. I'm trying to remember the one I used. I couldn't think of it when I was talking. Um, but I'll get that information. We'll get that information out. Is there a way to communicate that to the group?
Of course. Yep. I
Yeah,
know we are updating ours. It's a little bit dated, but I can throw that in the chat and
that would be
also
great.
email it out.
Yeah, that would be great, because that's the one I've used, the work zone. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right here. Um, and this is the app that I'm using currently. And
Yeah, I'll
it's a
throw
and
it
it's
in
a
the
it's a good tool. So
I'll throw it in the chat
okay, it looks like that on the phone. I don't know if people can see it or not, but there it is. Good
a
question.
little.
Yep. If you Google some stuff like that, and you can also print up, glad that question was asked. You can print up different diagrams and things, and have your foreman or people that are working out there, senior people, be able to fill out these, different designs of the roadways, and set it up so you have an idea, a template of what you typically follow. But one of the more hazardous things we do is working in traffic and out there each and every day. So do what you can to protect yourself and the others. Right. We want to protect the people traveling through our work zone as well. All right, work centers and project sites clean and organized. Really important flow of work. See if it makes sense with the flow of work and your material, right? And different things on how we're going to either the sand or salt pile, what we're dumping it through from grates or that sort of thing, ramps and so on and so forth. I think about that now because that's what we're doing, right? Plowing snow and things, snow removal. Good proper storage of materials. Here we put like stuff with like stuff, right? Your lift and chains and straps and things like that in one place, your lead cords and something else, your shovels, hand tools somewhere else, power tools somewhere else, that sort of thing. But good proper storage, room to move around, adequate resources, right? When we decide that we have a particular project or job to do, we want to make sure that we have those resources to do that sort of job. So lots of times we're finding ourselves managing limited resources. So it's important to understand what resources we need to do the job before we start to do it. Make sure we have the job so that the outcome is a positive one. Clear means of egress is another thing when it comes to our shops. Make sure your doors are open and easily able to travel through them. Think this time of year, snow and ice coming off the roof and things like that. Make sure that you spend time not only, clearing everything else out, but clearing yourself out as well, around the doors and things like that around the shop. You don't want to be having to use an overhead door to get out of your building because snow and ice has blocked the people doors, if you would. So good overall. This is an indication to me when I walk into a shop of, a lot of different factors. If you walked into a clean and organized work center, oftentimes all of the other stuff falls into place. When you sometimes when you look and it's not, not clean and organized. Sometimes because of, busy, just got done with the storm like many of us received the last couple of days. So it takes a little bit of time to recover from that, or, particularly big bridge project replacement type thing you're doing or something. But, as a general rule, you want your shop clean and organized, and it makes a big difference. If it's clean and organized initially, it's easier to keep it clean and organized going forward. Fall prevention and protection. We do just enough climbing wise. I find nowadays, instead of using the bucket loader to pick people up, we are doing a better job in actually getting a bucket truck and utilizing that bucket truck safely. Real quickly, if you do have a bucket truck, make sure people are trained and, authorized to use this type of bucket truck. Make sure you're keeping up on inspections and things like that. You still want to make sure you're clear, stay way away from the power lines, at least 10 feet, and then depending on what the voltage is, even further than that. The lanyard in a bucket truck, remember, you want to stay in the bucket. So you don't want the lanyard any longer than 2 feet. You're really looking at a positioning device. You don't want the 6-foot self-retracting lanyard on when you're in a bucket truck, because if you somehow, some way you get catapulted out of this bucket truck, you're just hanging there with that. So you want to stay in the truck, as the bucket truck itself, in the bucket particularly. So make sure you have it, no longer than a 2-foot lanyard. There's an anchor point built into the bucket. So utilize that sort of thing. When you can, eliminate the need to climb, right? If we don't have to climb, say, we have a grease fitting, that come to mind is a conveyor belt where a grease fitting's up above, is, put an extension on it and be able to grease those type of things from the ground. But question, do I really have to climb to begin with? So prevention's better, better. So if you the mid rail, the top rail, the toe board, if you're working underneath it, that sort of thing, systems like that are much better fall prevention as opposed to fall protection. If you're going to use a ladder, use the proper ladder, and use the ladder correctly. Here we've got many of you have probably noticed, you got a step ladder being used as an extension ladder. Really bad idea. They can slip out and things. You can see this one happens to be on a mat. But this is a risk that just isn't worth taking. We do have somebody, butting the ladder, but this is a straight ladder. Or if you're opening up, if you're going to use a step ladder, you got to open it up an A-frame ladder and make sure everything's locked in place. Remember, the top 2 steps of a step ladder are not steps, and they'll say it right on there. If you're using an extension ladder or a straight ladder, you want to be at least 3 rungs from the top, no higher than that on an extension ladder. If you're using a ladder and you're going up onto a platform, a loft, a roof, or whatever, you want to make sure that ladder extends at least 3 feet, 3 rungs over where you're accessing to. Use good climbing techniques. That's 3 points of contact. That's your belt buckle in between the outside rails of the ladder, so you're not leaning in either direction. Using proper fall prevention or fall protection in this case, right, with the appropriate ladder or appropriate fall prevention, fall protection type equipment, your lanyard, length of your lanyard, things like that. Your harness, you want a full body harness with a D-ring in the back. Shock absorbing lanyards, remember they open typically 3.5 feet. So if you're working with a 6 foot lanyard, it steps open to another 3.5. That's 10 feet. You're 6 feet tall, 16. You got to be, 17, 18 feet in the air to make sure before that even helps you. So think about that a little bit. Don't just throw on what you see on the table and go. So proper PPE, pretty important when it comes to fall prevention. Use a tool rope. If you get up there and you're working somewhere and you need tools, have a rope with a bucket and pull your tools up that way. Again, we don't do a lot of ladder and work, but we do some of it. Thinking about it in this time of year, take a look at your salt screens and things like that, and make sure your steps are in good condition. Make sure the rails are in good things. If you're going up to clean off the grade after you dumped load some sand or load some salt, you're going up there, make sure that gate closes and you're protected against falling off, especially during the icy and snowy conditions, right? We're never working when the weather's nice with those things. All right, so workplace violence and harassment, sexual harassment, or just any harassment, bullying in the workplace continues to be a significant topic. We have to do training on this once a year, annual training from a harassment and prevention standpoint. And here the focus, with these type of programs is prevent them from happening to begin with good leadership, with treating people the way they want to be treated, right? With dignity and respect, consistently and fairly. That goes a long way to preventing these type of things. So we've got a policy statement and program. I think everybody's got pretty much the policy statement done and completed and posted and things like that. So make sure you take a look at that, make sure it's still current, the program along with it. Good culture, we talked a little bit about that, so won't get into that in too much detail, but that having a good work culture goes a long way to preventing these things to begin with. Some sort of quality assessments, particularly important with your workplace violence stuff, is your office, your town office buildings, your DPW garages and things like that. View them as, hey, if someone wanted to do harm, how easy is it for them to get in? Can you see them? That sort of thing. Make sure you understand where you're vulnerable. Good separation, the height of the counter, the width of the counter, and things like that in your town office buildings and things should be something to be considered. We're always talking about cameras and that sort of thing. Just be careful with the cameras. They're really after the fact. It's not doing a whole lot to prevent them from happening to begin with, but cameras is a good tool for that. Effective training, early reporting. So if something doesn't feel right, doesn't look right, your gut's telling you something's off, report it. We're much happier dealing with something that turns out to be a false alarm or they're not a significant type event, as opposed to not having something reported and having it be a big deal. This day and age, things are a bit different than what they used to be. So treat people right. If you get caught in something where you're out there and you're out there and you're going to clean up some roadside, you might be taking some trees down, some shoulder work of some sort, and you're starting to have a problem with someone, right? Just come back to the shop, talk to your superintendent, person in charge, and say, hey, I've run into this. Get back to the shop, get to a safe location. Try not to get too involved in confronting somebody. Similar things happen snow plowing, right? When we snow plow and we continually plow the snow in the driveway, sometimes people get a little bit tense and upset with that. Just be careful. We don't have a lot of time to get into this, but if someone approaches you and you start to climb up on the truck or something, you would stop, that sort of thing. Don't roll your window down all the way, just crack it, that sort of thing. So think a little bit about that. You have a vested interest in their safety to a certain degree, but you also have a right to protect yourself. So revisit your workplace violence, harassment prevention type programs and protection if you haven't done that in a bit. It's always a good idea to talk about that. Safety toolbox talk or something. So PPE, right? It's our last measure. It's not something we jump to right away, but that doesn't mean it's not important. It is still important. So make sure you got good quality PPE. You're inspecting it. Make sure people that are using this PPE that it fits properly on, and be sure that you train them and show them the use, care, maintenance, and any limitations to that PPE. That's important. It's not foolproof, right? And there's different variations of PPE for different hazards. And again, we talked earlier about that hazard assessment piece. Be sure that you're doing that on an annual basis to make sure you're keeping that up to date. Respirators in particular are important enough to break out. If people are using respirators occasionally, dust masks, things like that. Be sure that you're giving them the Appendix D training that's found in the OSHA 1910 134 standard. It requires training, and I do a version of that typically with a toolbox talk a couple of times a year to make sure everybody's getting that. If you do require physical or require the use of respirators and they're tight fitting, meaning that they're restricting the airflow potentially to the lungs, you want to make sure that you're doing physicals, providing physicals for those people that are required to wear them, fit tests on an annual basis, and then training use, care, maintenance, and again, limitations of those respirators. So again, here, yeah, I'll use the example. It's an easy one to use. You're cutting concrete or blacktop or something like that. You got a rotary saw out there. Make sure that you're using water to minimize the dust, minimize the flying debris, and then bring in the PP after that. So the water, the wet saw would be an engineering control, and then additionally you'd add the PPE to control that sort of hazard. So some other safety topics, guarding, right, our drill presses, our saws in the shop, things of that nature. Make sure your hand tools, angle grinders are a common one here I find, but grinders in general, make sure you have your guards in place on those things. Real easy to take them off and then they never get put back on. Right tool for the job, right? Try to resist the urge of using oftentimes a screwdriver as a pry bar or something like that. So try to use the right tool and or equipment for the job or the task at hand. Ergonomics, right? Make sure that there's a lot out there now that fit the job to the worker type thing, right? We're not trying to fit the worker to the job. We're trying to fit the job and work it so that it works well with the worker. So the ergonomics is an important part of that sort of thing. Slip, trips, and falls continually be at least our number one for injuries this time of year, especially, but any time of year. So do what you can to minimize the risk of slip, trips, and falls with different types of taking care of trip hazards, wet floors, things of that nature. Our electrical infrastructure, a lot of the DPW garages I visit, right, they were built in a time in which we didn't have or didn't put in an awful lot of outlets. Maybe the electrical infrastructure is a little bit, older. Try to refrain from using any sort of lead cords, temporary wiring as permanent, running them through doors or windows or around door frames or anything like that. So whatever you start using lead cord and you're using it all the time, so you're using something temporary as permanent, you can be cited for that. And also there's hazards associated with that. A common one to think a little bit about here is your multi-strips plugged into multi-strips. So that's something that you shouldn't be doing, is one multi-strip is going back to one outlet. If you add another multi-strip to that, all of that power that you're consuming is going back to one outlet. So be careful not to plug a multi-strip into a multi-strip. That's the end. Once you send that one multi-strip out, you're tapping out that outlet or that one circuit going back to the breaker. Vehicles and machinery, this is what we do, right? We handle material, we move material, everything's hard, everything's heavy, things like that. So be particularly careful with the vehicles and machinery and things of that nature, right? If you've got somebody that's backing up on a job and somebody's available, make sure the person goes over, makes eye contact with the operator, make sure they understand they're going to be helping to back that piece of machinery or equipment in. And then at that point, go ahead and start using the spotter. But be very careful. Don't approach people working in vehicles or machinery or any type of equipment without making eye contact from a distance first before getting too close, because they may not see it. They may be working. Think about the loader loading this time of year with, dark and snowing and wind blowing and things like that. So be very careful approaching anybody working with equipment or machinery. in reviewing a little bit, the grassroots safety is really important here when I start thinking about it. Everything really boils down to what's the system, right? If you have unfortunately a prevention measures fails and you have an incident occur, really easy to do the investigation, trying to figure out, okay, well, how did this happen and how do we prevent it from happening again, right? What's the system? Did our system have a flaw in it? Did we not train people to follow the system, or maybe they didn't understand it? Maybe our training wasn't effective, and an overall culture, or what with the system we develop, the training we provide is the culture allowing people, whether they've been here 1 month or they've been here, 25 years, is the culture allowing us to follow this, or is there a culture allowing us to, or encouraging people to do it another way? That's just the way Phil said it during orientation, but this is really how we do it. Phil has to say that because that's his job, but really we know in order to get the job done, we're doing something else. That's the culture that you want to work on and try to minimize that. So if you agree upon something, let's do it that way. If we don't agree to it or it's not working out, then let somebody know that we can work it through and refine that system. Because oftentimes when we do build a system, we find, oh, we didn't think about that when we start doing it. And it's okay to change it. It's okay to revise it, as opposed to just say, oh, we'll leave it on paper that way, but we're not going to do it that way. That's where we start to have a bit of problems. Build great systems, develop good people. I think there's a lot to be said for that, right? We're trying to develop people and we're trying to build great systems so that, good people can follow those systems, right? We're continually doing more with less, so this becomes more important. A foundation of trust, leadership, and communication. Obviously, I started this in the beginning. I think it's very important to do what you say you're going to do. And the biggest way to build trust is tell somebody, or you're going to tell somebody you're going to do something, then do it. And do it. And if there's some reason where it doesn't get done, you circle back with that person, let them know. But so many things boil down to trust and then some leadership, right? And you don't have to be in a position of leadership to have leadership skills, right? Leadership oftentimes is through influence. It's not over, directing or being in charge of someone or anything like that. Leadership is done in many different ways. It doesn't have to be just from the boss. And communication, right? We struggle with communication. Some people tell me I talk too much, but I think I'd rather do that than to not say something and then later on saying, oh, I wish I said something. So I don't think you can over communicate, but definitely communicate so people know what's going on. This is a little picture here. This person an hour ago was using an upside down 5-gallon bucket. And I said, geez, I'd really not rather have you not do that. It's much better to use a ladder, and you can see he had a nice little small step ladder. He's actually using it correctly. So anyway, a little bit of a success story there. Encourage people to think things through. You talk about the dominoes oftentimes when I'm doing training, right? We played dominoes, and the result of playing dominoes was, you hit the first one and you develop this train of dominoes, if you would, and the goal was, have it go around until the last one falls. And I use it in a little different way, is that if you string off these dominoes, so dominoes, they're all us, or they're all something in which we could do something differently, and that end result, that domino won't fall. So the end result, if the domino falls, is the incident. Takes any one of us take one of those dominoes out, and if done correctly, the last domino is never going to fall. So that's a thing. I think we all have the ability possibly to change an outcome. Safety is really hard to measure because you never know what you had a hand in or help in preventing, but you certainly know what you didn't. And don't be afraid. Pull that domino out, pause. Hey, you never know what you have an opportunity to prevent. And say, hey, wait, is there a better way of doing this? Hey, we're doing way too much risk for what the reward is, with the goal of everybody going home whole every day. That's the absolute goal. Safety, when it boils down to it, it's a lot of common sense. It's making the right decision at the right time and having that wisdom, experience, training, knowledge to push you in that direction of making the right decision at the right time. Be sure the brain is engaged before putting body in motion. And I'll add to this here is minimize those distractions, right? Keep people so they're focused on the task at hand. And many of you have heard me say this. I think this is probably the biggest thing is creating the incident in someone's mind without that incident occurring. And oftentimes, been called into different companies that, had a really serious injury or even a few fatalities. And they say, Spies, what do you need? We'll stop production. We're getting people in for training, money, time. Not an issue because we just had a serious event and we don't want it to happen again. But as time goes on, these same companies go back, they revert back to whatever the culture was prior to that. So it's real important from a safety professional leadership standpoint or a team member, anybody, is creating that incident in someone's mind without it occurring because that keeps you sharp. That keeps you paying attention a little bit. So that's the biggest thing. Remember the why safety, every incident's a number, it's a life, it's a story, it's family, friends, coworkers. We start out by making it a personal connection. And certainly that's what we want to wrap up as is we have to focus on why it is we're working, who it is we're working for. And remember, at the end of the day, um, it's really all about going home whole. And whatever we can do to collectively do that is what we need to do. Because when that doesn't happen, when someone's not allowed to go home at the end of the day because of a work-related injury or illness, or maybe at home too, it's the same thing that applies at home. That's what we want to avoid. So with that, I think it's just around 10 a.m. So we're finishing up. I'm not sure if there's any more questions in the chat. I think we answered at least one app for that work zone flagger things. If there's other questions, David Orr and their team, know how to get a hold of me. I'd love to help in any way that I can. Thank you very much for coming in today. I think David just popped back on, so we'll let David finish this up.
No, I just was gonna just say thank you very much, Phil, and hopefully we'll see folks at future webinars. Um, Glad to see as many folks on here for this, and everybody should be safe every single day. That's our number one goal. So, thanks, Phil.
Yep, thanks, David. Have a great rest of the day.